Introduction. The house that was never built. There is an old story about a master architect whose work was admired across kingdoms. Kings competed for his designs. Merchants waited years for the chance to hire him. Travelers crossed mountains simply to stand before the magnificent buildings that carried his signature. One autumn morning, a young apprentice arrived at his workshop carrying a rolled-up blueprint beneath his arm. "I want to build something people will remember forever," the apprentice said. The old architect smiled and invited him to walk. Instead of leading him toward one of his famous buildings, he guided him to an empty field at the edge of the city. There was nothing there. No walls, no pillars, no roof, only a quiet stretch of earth warmed by the morning sun. The apprentice looked around, confused. "I thought you were going to show me your greatest masterpiece." "I am," the architect replied. The apprentice laughed softly. "There isn't anything here." The old man knelt and placed his hand on the ground. "That's because you're looking for walls. My greatest work was never the building. It was the foundation beneath it." The apprentice frowned. "I don't understand." The architect picked up a handful of soil and let it slowly fall through his fingers. "People admire what rises into the sky. They rarely think about what disappears beneath the earth." He looked toward the city where magnificent towers shimmered in the distance. Every great building owes its strength to something no one ever sees. Without another word, the architect began walking back toward the workshop. The apprentice remained behind, staring at the empty field. For the first time, he wondered if the most important part of success had always been invisible. Years later, the apprentice became an accomplished architect himself. People constantly asked him the same question: "How do you create buildings that last for generations?" Most expected him to talk about expensive materials, remarkable engineering, perfect craftsmanship. Instead, he always smiled and answered with the same quiet sentence: "I spend more time building what no one will ever see." We often believe wealth begins the moment someone earns their first $1 million, or launches a successful company, or buys a beautiful home, or finally reaches financial freedom. But those are only the visible walls. The true construction began years earlier, in choices so ordinary that no one applauded them. A book opened instead of another hour of distraction. An investment made instead of an impulse purchase. A difficult conversation accepted instead of avoided. An early morning chosen over another comfortable excuse. A promise kept when no one was watching. These moments rarely feel extraordinary. Yet together, they become the unseen foundation upon which remarkable lives are built. That is why success often appears mysterious. People see the finished building. They never witness the years spent strengthening the ground beneath it. Perhaps you have looked at someone successful and wondered, what do they know that I don't? Maybe you've watched entrepreneurs, investors, creators, or business owners and imagined they possessed a secret unavailable to everyone else. A hidden opportunity, a rare talent, an extraordinary stroke of luck. But what if the greatest advantage wasn't hidden at all? What if it was quietly repeated every single day? Not through dramatic actions, but through invisible decisions. Because wealth rarely arrives as a surprise. It usually arrives as the predictable result of habits that have been patiently compounding for years. The remarkable thing about those habits is that they often seem too small to matter. Until one day, they matter more than anything else. Imagine walking through two neighborhoods. The first is filled with elegant homes, flourishing gardens, and streets that seem almost timeless. The second is lined with abandoned buildings, cracked sidewalks, and neglected spaces. At first glance, they appear completely different. But neither neighborhood became what it is overnight. Every beautiful street was once an empty field. Every neglected building was once brand new. The difference was never created in a single day. It emerged from thousands of small decisions made over many years. Repair or postpone, invest or consume, maintain or neglect, build or drift. Lives follow exactly the same pattern. Throughout this audiobook, we are not going to chase shortcuts, because shortcuts often lead somewhere we never intended to go. We are not going to promise overnight riches, because anything built overnight can disappear just as quickly. Instead, we are going to explore something far more valuable: the invisible architecture behind lasting wealth. Together, we will uncover why attention is the first investment every wealthy life makes, why energy becomes a form of capital long before money ever does, why some people quietly build opportunities while others unknowingly consume them, why ownership changes the way we think, why responsibility becomes freedom, why our environment silently shapes our future, why courage is often disguised as an imperfect first step, and why patience remains one of the greatest financial advantages available to anyone willing to embrace it. Each chapter is another stone in the foundation. On its own, one stone changes very little. Placed carefully beside the next, and the next, and the next, it becomes something capable of supporting an extraordinary future. So before we begin, I want to leave you with one question. If someone examined your daily habits without ever seeing your bank account, would they be able to predict your financial future? The answer to that question may reveal more than any balance sheet ever could. Because every fortune is built twice. First, in the quiet architecture of the mind, and only later, in the visible world everyone else can see. Welcome to the architecture of wealth. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Currency of Attention. There is a quiet story told among the old lighthouse keepers of the northern coast. Long before satellites, radar, and modern navigation, ships depended upon a single beam of light to find their way home. Every evening, as darkness settled over the sea, the keeper climbed a winding stone staircase carrying only a lantern and a small brass key. The climb was always the same: hundreds of narrow steps, the same cold walls, the same silent wind. Visitors often wondered why such an experienced keeper performed the ritual with such precision. Surely, they would say, missing one evening couldn't matter that much. The keeper would simply smile. One winter, a young assistant arrived to learn the profession. He expected exciting rescues, dramatic storms, and heroic moments. Instead, his first assignment was surprisingly ordinary: clean the lens. The assistant looked puzzled. That's all. That's all. The massive glass lens stood nearly twice his height. It looked spotless. Still, he polished it carefully. The next evening, the keeper gave him the same task. And the next. And the next. After several weeks, frustration began to grow. We're wasting time, the assistant complained. No one would notice if we skipped this once. The old keeper walked to the window overlooking the endless ocean. Exactly, he said quietly. No one would notice. The assistant folded his arms. So why does it matter? The keeper pointed toward the horizon. Ships don't disappear because of one giant mistake. They disappear because of tiny ones. A fingerprint left on the lens. A moment of distraction. A small shortcut taken because it seemed harmless. By the time anyone notices, the rocks are already beneath the water. The assistant stared through the crystal glass toward the sea. For the first time, he understood. The lighthouse wasn't protecting ships only during storms. It was protecting them every ordinary night that looked perfectly safe. Our lives work much the same way. We often imagine success arriving through extraordinary decisions. A brilliant investment, a revolutionary business idea, the perfect opportunity. But extraordinary lives are rarely built upon extraordinary moments alone. They are built upon ordinary moments that receive extraordinary attention. Attention is one of the few resources every human being receives equally. Every morning, each of us wakes with 24 hours. No billionaire receives 25. No struggling student receives 23. Time is distributed equally. Attention is not. That is where fortunes quietly begin to separate. Imagine walking into the world's greatest library. Millions of books surround you. Every answer you could ever seek waits patiently on its shelves. Now imagine spending your entire visit staring at your phone. The library wasn't lacking opportunity. Your attention simply never reached it. The modern world has become remarkably skilled at competing for something more valuable than your money. Competes for your focus. Every notification whispers. Every advertisement interrupts. Every headline promises urgency. Every endless stream of entertainment asks for just one more minute. Individually, none of these seem dangerous. Together, they quietly redirect the course of a lifetime. Because attention is like sunlight. Scattered across a field, it gently warms the ground. Focused through a single magnifying glass, can ignite a fire. Many people believe wealthy individuals make better financial decisions because they possess more knowledge. Knowledge certainly helps. But knowledge without attention is like owning a map you never unfold. The first investment successful people make is not money. It is intention. They learn to choose what deserves their focus. They understand a simple truth. Everything you repeatedly pay attention to grows. If you constantly focus on fear, fear grows. If you constantly focus on problems, problems multiply. If you consistently focus on learning, understanding compounds. If you continually focus on creating value, opportunities begin appearing where others see only obstacles. Attention is remarkably obedient. It follows whatever we repeatedly invite into our minds. The difficult part is remembering that every invitation comes with a hidden cost. Consider two neighbors. Each leaves home at 8 every morning and returns at 6 each evening. From the outside, their lives appear nearly identical. The first arrives home exhausted and collapses onto the couch. An hour of videos becomes 2. 2 becomes 3. He promises himself tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow rarely is. The second neighbor is equally tired. She prepares dinner, then spends 30 quiet minutes studying a skill related to her work. Some evenings she reads. Some evenings she practices. Some evenings she simply reflects on the lessons of the day. 30 minutes doesn't seem impressive. After 1 week, the difference is almost invisible. After 1 month, still difficult to notice. After 1 year, the gap begins to widen. After 10 years, they appear to have lived completely different lives. People often call the second neighbor lucky. Luck had very little to do with it. One person repeatedly invested attention. The other repeatedly surrendered it. There is an illusion that distractions are harmless because they disappear the moment we close the screen. But distractions rarely disappear. They accumulate. They slowly train the mind to seek novelty instead of mastery, reaction instead of reflection, consumption instead of creation. Over time, the habit becomes invisible. The mind begins craving constant stimulation. Silence feels uncomfortable. Deep thinking feels difficult. Meaningful work feels exhausting. Not because the work became harder, but because attention became weaker. This may be one of the greatest hidden costs of modern life. The loss is not merely hours. The loss is the ability to concentrate deeply enough to produce something extraordinary. A sculptor was once asked how he created statues that seemed almost alive. He answered, "I don't create them. I simply remove everything that isn't the sculpture." Attention works exactly the same way. A meaningful life rarely requires adding more. More information, more entertainment, more opinions, more urgency. Sometimes wealth begins by removing what constantly interrupts your ability to think clearly. Because clarity has enormous value. The entrepreneur who notices a hidden opportunity. The investor who patiently waits while others panic. The artist who sees beauty where others overlook it. The leader who recognizes a solution before anyone else. All are rewarded not because they saw more, but because they noticed what others ignored. Attention sharpens perception. Perception changes decisions. Decisions shape destiny. The remarkable thing about attention is that it compounds quietly. A single page read today seems insignificant. One thoughtful conversation appears ordinary. 1 hour spent learning a valuable skill feels almost forgettable. But attention has memory. Stacks. Each focused moment makes the next one easier. Curiosity deepens. Understanding expands. Confidence grows. Eventually, others see only the visible result. They admire the business, the investments, the achievements, the calm confidence. They rarely notice the thousands of ordinary evenings when someone simply chose to protect their attention instead of giving it away. The old lighthouse keeper eventually retired. Before leaving, he handed the brass key to his former apprentice. "There is one lesson I hope you never forget," he said. "The light isn't what saves the ships. The care given to the light does." Those words extend far beyond the sea. Your future may depend less on the opportunities that appear before you, and more on the attention you bring to them, because every remarkable life is illuminated long before anyone notices its brilliance. Not by chance, not by talent alone, but by the quiet decision, repeated every day, to guard the most valuable currency you possess, your attention. In the next chapter, we'll explore another form of wealth that most people spend carelessly without realizing it a resource even more fundamental than money, and the true engine behind every lasting fortune, your energy. Chapter 2. The engine behind every fortune. There is an old legend about two blacksmiths who lived at opposite ends of the same valley. Both possessed remarkable skill. Both had inherited the same tools. Both worked with the same iron, the same fire, and the same endless stream of customers. For many years, their businesses appeared nearly identical. Then something curious happened. One blacksmith became known throughout the kingdom. His work was sought after by nobles, merchants, and master builders alike. People waited months for one of his creations. The other gradually faded into obscurity. His workshop became quieter each year. His tools grew dull. His spirit followed. A young traveler, fascinated by the mystery, decided to visit both workshops. He expected to find secret techniques or rare materials. Instead, he noticed something much simpler. Every morning before the sun rose, the first blacksmith stepped outside his workshop. He breathed in the crisp morning air. He stretched his tired muscles. He walked slowly through a nearby forest before lighting the furnace. Only after preparing himself did he begin shaping iron. The second blacksmith followed a different routine. He stumbled into the workshop before dawn, exhausted from another restless night. He skipped breakfast. He ignored the persistent ache in his shoulders. He worked without pause, believing every minute spent resting was a minute wasted. At first, the difference seemed insignificant. One took care of himself. The other ignored himself. Years passed. The first blacksmith's hands remained steady. His mind stayed sharp. He solved difficult problems with calm confidence. The second grew impatient. His hammer struck with less precision. Small mistakes became frequent. Orders took longer. Customers slowly disappeared. The traveler finally asked the successful blacksmith, "What is your secret?" The old craftsman smiled. "I don't begin by forging iron. I begin by protecting the one thing that forges everything else. Myself." Many people believe money is the first form of wealth. It isn't. Long before someone accumulates financial capital, they possess something even more valuable: energy. Every accomplishment you have ever admired was created by someone who transformed energy into value. A company begins with someone's focused effort. A beautiful piece of music begins with someone's creative energy. A successful investment requires mental clarity. A meaningful relationship demands emotional presence. Even the wealthiest individuals on Earth cannot purchase more hours in a day. What they often protect is the quality of the energy they bring to those hours. Imagine receiving 100 gold coins every morning. Whatever remains at sunset disappears forever. No matter how carefully you save them, tomorrow begins with another 100. Would you spend them carelessly? Probably not. Yet each day we receive something even more precious. Mental energy, physical vitality, emotional resilience. Unlike money, these resources quietly influence every decision we make. When your energy is high, challenges become puzzles. When your energy is depleted, even simple tasks feel overwhelming. The opportunity may remain exactly the same. Only your capacity to respond has changed. There is a common misunderstanding about productivity. People often believe successful individuals simply work harder than everyone else. Sometimes they do, but more often they work from a place of greater clarity. Picture two woodsmen standing before identical forests. The first swings his axe endlessly. He refuses to stop. Hour after hour, he hacks away with determination. The second pauses every so often. He sharpens the blade. He drinks water. He rests his muscles. When he returns to work, each strike carries greater force. By sunset, the second woodsman has accomplished far more. Not because he worked fewer hours, but because he protected the quality of every hour. Life follows the same principle. Your body is the axe. Your mind is the blade. Ignoring either eventually slows everything else. Modern culture often celebrates exhaustion as though it were a badge of honor. People proudly announce how little they sleep, how busy they are, how overwhelmed they feel, as if constant fatigue were evidence of ambition. But exhaustion is rarely a sign of effectiveness. More often, it signals imbalance. Imagine asking a racehorse to compete after days without proper food or rest. The horse may possess incredible strength. Its potential remains unchanged, yet its performance will inevitably suffer. Human beings are no different. The greatest opportunities in life often require clear judgment. Clear judgment requires a healthy mind. A healthy mind depends upon a healthy body. These are not separate investments. They are the same investment viewed from different angles. Energy is influenced by countless invisible choices. The quality of your sleep, the food you eat, the conversations you have, the thoughts you repeat, the stress you carry, the movement your body receives. None of these produce immediate financial rewards, but together they determine how effectively you create value over decades. Think of a magnificent steam engine. It may be crafted from the finest steel. Its design may be flawless. Yet without fuel, it remains perfectly useless. Knowledge is the engine. Energy is the fuel. Without fuel, even extraordinary talent remains motionless. A wise gardener once explained why two identical seeds produced completely different trees. The seed wasn't the problem, he said. It was the soil. Many people spend years searching for better opportunities while neglecting the condition from which all opportunity grows. Themselves. A healthier body notices possibilities more quickly. A rested mind solves problems more creatively. An emotionally balanced person builds stronger relationships. These advantages may appear small on any single day. Over years, they become enormous. Just as compound interest quietly multiplies money, healthy habits quietly multiply human potential. Consider two entrepreneurs beginning identical businesses. One believes success requires sacrificing every aspect of personal well-being. He sleeps little. He skips meals. He neglects exercise. His stress becomes constant. Initially, he appears unstoppable. Months later, decision fatigue begins to cloud his judgment. Creativity fades. Small setbacks feel catastrophic. Burnout quietly replaces ambition. The second entrepreneur also works tirelessly, but she understands something different. She protects her mornings. She exercises. She rests when necessary. She nourishes both body and mind. From the outside, these habits appear unrelated to business. In reality, they become one of her greatest competitive advantages. She consistently makes better decisions because she consistently feels capable of making them. One of the greatest myths surrounding wealth is that successful people simply possess more discipline. Discipline certainly matters, but discipline itself depends upon energy. When you are physically exhausted, resisting temptation becomes harder. When your mind is overwhelmed, focusing becomes difficult. When your emotions remain unsettled, long-term thinking often disappears. Many poor decisions are not failures of intelligence. They are failures of capacity. The mind cannot always perform beyond the condition of the body supporting it. Protecting your energy, therefore, becomes an act of wisdom rather than indulgence. Near the end of his life, the old blacksmith was asked what he considered his greatest creation. People expected him to point toward a magnificent gate or an ornate sword displayed proudly in the royal palace. Instead, he looked at his weathered hands. "My greatest creation," he said softly, "was becoming someone who could keep creating." His words contained a lesson far greater than craftsmanship. Money can be lost. Businesses can fail. Markets can rise and fall. But a person who continually renews their energy, protects their health, and strengthens their mind carries within them the ability to build again. That is a form of wealth no market can measure. Because before fortunes are built in bank accounts, they are built in bodies that can endure, minds that can focus, and spirits that refuse to burn out before the journey is complete. In the next chapter, we will discover why some people spend their lives consuming the world around them, while others quietly become the creators who shape it, and why that single distinction changes everything. Chapter 3. Consumers and Creators. There is a quiet village nestled between two mountains where, many generations ago, two sculptors began their careers on the very same day. Both were gifted. Both studied under the same master. Both received an identical block of flawless white marble. When they unveiled their first sculptures, the townspeople could hardly tell the difference. Yet 20 years later, their lives could not have been more different. The first sculptor had become renowned across the kingdom. His work adorned libraries, universities, grand halls, and public gardens. People traveled for days just to admire what he had created. The second sculptor remained talented, but his workshop was strangely empty. He often wondered why success had chosen someone else. One afternoon, a young traveler visited both workshops hoping to understand the difference. The first sculptor's studio buzzed with quiet purpose. Half-finished masterpieces stood beneath linen cloths. Sketches covered the walls. Shelves overflowed with notebooks filled with observations gathered over decades. Every corner suggested that something new was constantly being born. The second workshop looked different. The room was beautiful. Expensive furniture, elegant decorations, rare imported tools, paintings collected from distant lands. Everything reflected refined taste. Yet there was almost nothing unfinished, nothing growing, nothing becoming. The traveler asked the second sculptor, "Where are the pieces you're working on?" The sculptor looked around the room. "I've been busy improving the workshop." The traveler nodded politely, but he noticed something curious. The room had become more impressive. The artist had not. That quiet distinction follows many people throughout life. Some spend years improving appearances. Others spend years improving abilities. One collects possessions. The other collects skills. One measures success by what can be displayed. The other measures success by what can be created. At first, these paths seem almost identical. Both involve effort. Both involve spending money. Both can even look successful from the outside. But beneath the surface, they move in opposite directions. One life gradually fills with things. The other gradually fills with value. Imagine standing beside a river. Every day, the current carries fresh water downstream. Now imagine two people living beside that river. The first arrives each morning carrying empty buckets. He gathers enough water for the day and returns home. Tomorrow he must repeat the process. The second spends his mornings differently. Instead of carrying more buckets, he begins building a water wheel. First, his neighbors laugh. The work seems slow. The progress is almost invisible. While others are collecting water, he appears to accomplish very little. Weeks pass, then months. Finally, the wheel begins to turn. The river now works for him. Water flows effortlessly into his fields. His crops flourish. Soon, the same people who laughed begin asking how he became so fortunate. They see the harvest. They never noticed the seasons spent building the wheel. Money behaves much like that river. Most people focus on how much flows into their hands today. Builders ask a different question. What can I create today that continues producing tomorrow? That question quietly changes everything. It transforms spending into investing, consumption into creation, temporary comfort into lasting opportunity. There is nothing wrong with enjoying beautiful things. A comfortable home, a memorable vacation, a fine meal shared with family. These experiences enrich life. The problem begins when consumption becomes the destination instead of the reward. Modern culture constantly whispers that happiness is only one purchase away. A newer phone, a larger television, another subscription, another trend, another upgrade. For a brief moment, excitement arrives. Then it quietly fades. Soon another desire appears. Another purchase promises satisfaction. The cycle repeats itself. Not because people lack intelligence, but because consumption is designed to feel complete while remaining permanently unfinished. It offers moments. Creation offers meaning. Think back to your childhood. Chances are you remember building something far more vividly than buying something. Perhaps it was a treehouse, a drawing, a small business, a science project, a song, a story. The satisfaction came not from ownership, came from creation. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, many people slowly reverse that relationship. Instead of asking, "What can I build?" they begin asking, "What can I buy?" The question seems harmless. Over decades, it reshapes an entire life. A wise craftsman once said, "Every object in this room represents someone's imagination made visible." Look around any home, every chair, every book, every lamp, every piece of technology, every work of art. Someone created it before someone consumed it. Creators shape economies. Consumers sustain them. Both are necessary. But the greatest financial rewards usually flow toward those who solve problems, invent solutions, improve experiences, or build things that continue serving others. Creation is simply another form of generosity. It begins by asking, "How can I make someone's life a little better?" The marketplace has a remarkable habit of rewarding people who answer that question consistently. This does not mean everyone must become an entrepreneur. Creation takes many forms. A teacher creates understanding. A nurse creates healing. An engineer creates solutions. A writer creates ideas. A chef creates experiences. A software developer creates efficiency. A parent creates character in the next generation. Creation is not defined by a job title. It is defined by contribution. Every time you leave something better than you found it, you have created value. And value has a curious way of returning to those who produce it. Sometimes as opportunity, sometimes as trust, sometimes as income, often as all three. One evening, the young traveler returned to the successful sculptor. He asked the question that had been quietly growing in his mind. "When did your life begin to change?" The sculptor smiled. "It changed the day I stopped asking how I could earn more." The traveler looked surprised. "What did you ask instead?" The sculptor ran his hand gently across an unfinished statue. I asked how I could become someone whose work was impossible to ignore. Money eventually followed. But it was never leading. Those words contain a truth that many spend a lifetime discovering. Income often reflects the value we create. Not immediately, not perfectly, but over time. People rarely become wealthy by chasing money alone. They become valuable first. Money simply recognizes that value. Imagine planting 2 gardens. In the first, you harvest every fruit as soon as it appears. Nothing is left behind. Nothing grows beyond today. In the second, you set aside some of the healthiest fruit. Not to eat, but to plant. First, this feels like sacrifice. You could have enjoyed that harvest immediately. Instead, you chose tomorrow over today. Years later, one garden still depends upon daily effort. The other has become an orchard. Creation often feels slower than consumption. That is precisely why it becomes so powerful. It asks for patience. It rewards persistence. And eventually, it begins producing results far beyond the effort originally invested. Before the traveler left the village for the final time, he asked the old sculptor one last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone just beginning their journey, what would it be? The sculptor looked around his workshop. Some statues were complete. Others existed only as rough outlines waiting patiently beneath layers of stone. He smiled. Never measure your life by how much you've collected. Measure it by how much would still exist if everything you owned disappeared. The traveler carried those words with him for the rest of his life. Because houses may be sold. Cars may grow old. Technology eventually becomes outdated. But skills endure. Character deepens. Wisdom compounds. The ability to create can never be repossessed. And perhaps that is the greatest investment any person can ever make. For those who learn to create value rarely spend their lives chasing wealth. Instead, wealth quietly begins chasing them. In the next chapter, we will explore why the future is never stumbled upon by accident, but quietly purchased in advance through decisions that often seem insignificant today. Chapter 4. The future is purchased in advance. There is an old story about 2 brothers who inherited neighboring farms at the edge of a wide valley. The land was equally fertile. The rivers flowed with the same clear water. The seasons showed no favoritism. When their father passed away, he left each son an identical piece of land and only a single piece of advice. Never mistake today's harvest for tomorrow's security. The older brother smiled politely but paid little attention. The younger brother wrote the words inside a small leather journal he carried everywhere. For the first few years, both farms prospered. The rains were generous. The fields overflowed with grain. Their barns were full, and the village celebrated another season of abundance. The older brother saw no reason to worry. Whenever his neighbors praised his success, he laughed. Why store more grain? Look around us. The fields have never failed. So after every harvest, he sold nearly everything. He expanded his house, bought finer horses, hosted grand celebrations. His farm looked increasingly prosperous. The younger brother did something that puzzled everyone. He sold part of his harvest. He lived comfortably but simply. Then, without fail, he carried a portion of the finest grain into a quiet stone building behind his home. He never touched it. Year after year, he filled the storehouse a little more. The villagers whispered, "He worries too much. He doesn't know how to enjoy life. He acts as though disaster is coming." The younger brother simply smiled. "I am not preparing for disaster. I am preparing for uncertainty." Then one summer, the rains never came. The river shrank. The earth cracked beneath the relentless sun. Fields that had once shimmered with golden grain became endless stretches of dust. The harvest failed. Then the next one failed as well. Panic spread through the valley. Families began selling tools to buy food. Livestock disappeared. Homes were abandoned. The older brother stared across his empty fields in disbelief. Only a year earlier, he had believed abundance would last forever. Now he stood before empty barns and impossible choices. Meanwhile, the younger brother quietly unlocked the heavy wooden doors of his stone storehouse. Inside rested years of preparation, not because he had predicted the drought, because he had accepted something far more important. The future is never certain. One evening, the older brother walked across the valley. His pride had long since faded. When he reached the stone building, he asked softly, "How did you know?" The younger brother looked toward the dry horizon. "I didn't." "Then why prepare?" "Because uncertainty isn't an exception. It's the rule." That lesson reaches far beyond farming. Most people imagine the future as something waiting to happen. Builders see it differently. They understand the future is quietly shaped by decisions made long before anyone notices their effects. Preparation rarely feels exciting. There are no applause, no headlines, no immediate rewards. In fact, preparation often feels invisible. Yet nearly every remarkable achievement begins with work that no one else ever sees. The musician practices scales before stepping onto the stage. The athlete trains long before the championship. The entrepreneur studies long before launching a business. The investor patiently accumulates knowledge long before buying the first asset. The harvest always comes after the planting, never before. Imagine boarding a ship preparing to cross a vast ocean. One captain spends every waking hour decorating the cabins. The furniture is beautiful. The dining hall is magnificent. Guests admire every detail. The second captain spends his days inspecting the engine, testing navigation systems, repairing hidden weaknesses below the deck. To the passengers, his work appears unnecessary. Nothing seems broken. Then the storm arrives. Suddenly, beautiful furniture becomes irrelevant. Only preparation matters. Life has a remarkable way of doing the same thing. The storm is never announced in advance. It simply arrives. A recession, a health challenge, an unexpected expense, a changing industry, a new opportunity. Preparation determines whether these moments become disasters or turning points. Many people think saving money is simply about having more money. It is something much greater. Savings purchase freedom. They buy time. They buy options. They buy peace of mind. Imagine receiving a phone call offering the opportunity of a lifetime. Perhaps it's a chance to start a business, invest in an idea, return to school, move to a new city, accept a dream job. Opportunities often arrive unexpectedly. The question is rarely, will opportunity appear? The real question is, will you be prepared when it does? Preparation transforms opportunity from wishful thinking into possibility. Preparation extends far beyond finances. Every book you read before you need its wisdom is preparation. Every skill you practice before someone pays you for it is preparation. Every healthy habit built before illness appears is preparation. Every meaningful relationship nurtured before difficult times is preparation. These investments often seem unrewarded in the beginning. That is because they are quietly accumulating beneath the surface, much like roots growing beneath a tree. Invisible, silent, essential. There is a reason great builders spend so much time studying blueprints before laying the first stone. Mistakes become far more expensive once construction begins. Life works the same way. Planning rarely guarantees success, but the absence of planning almost guarantees unnecessary struggle. This does not mean every detail must be controlled. No one can predict every twist of the road. The future has always belonged to those willing to adapt. Preparation is not about controlling tomorrow. It is about becoming capable of meeting tomorrow with confidence. A wise sailor once explained the difference between fear and preparation. He said, I don't carry a lifeboat because I expect the ship to sink. I carry it because I respect the sea. That quiet distinction changes everything. Builders do not save because they expect failure. They save because they understand uncertainty. They learn new skills because industries evolve. They invest because economies change. They prepare because life itself is unpredictable. Preparation is not pessimism. It is wisdom. As the years passed, rain eventually returned to the valley. The fields became green once more. The younger brother reopened his journal. On the first page remained his father's simple sentence. Never mistake today's harvest for tomorrow's security. He smiled, not because he had survived the drought, but because he had discovered something even more valuable. True confidence is not believing nothing will ever go wrong. True confidence is quietly knowing you have prepared yourself to respond when it does. That kind of confidence cannot be purchased overnight. It is earned through countless ordinary decisions repeated over many years. Every dollar saved, every skill learned, every relationship strengthened, every healthy habit protected, every hour invested in becoming someone ready for opportunities not yet visible. Because the future is not built when tomorrow arrives. It is being built today, in ways so small that most people overlook them. Yet one day, those invisible preparations become visible results, and others call it luck. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most powerful ideas in building lasting prosperity. The ownership principle: why true wealth grows not from possessing more things, but from owning the things that continue creating value long after they are acquired. Chapter 5. The Ownership Principle. There is an ancient story about two builders who arrived in the same thriving city with nothing more than a small pouch of silver and an ambitious dream. The city was alive with opportunity. Merchants filled the marketplaces. Ships arrived daily from distant lands. New homes, workshops, and roads were being built faster than anyone could remember. To both builders, it seemed like the perfect place to begin. Each received the same payment for constructing their first project. Each celebrated their success. Each believed they were standing at the beginning of a prosperous future. But from that day forward, they made one small decision differently. The first builder loved beautiful things. Whenever he completed a project, he rewarded himself. A larger house, more elegant furniture, rare artwork, fine clothing. His life grew increasingly comfortable. People admired his success. The second builder enjoyed beautiful things as well. But after every project, he quietly purchased something different. A small piece of land, a share in a flour mill, a warehouse near the harbor. Later, he invested in a vineyard owned by a trusted friend. Years passed. From the outside, the first builder appeared wealthier. His home became one of the grandest in the city. Guests admired every room. Children pointed toward his estate with amazement. The second builder's life remained surprisingly modest. Nothing about him suggested extraordinary wealth. Then something unexpected happened. The first builder became ill for several months. Without his labor, his income stopped. Bills continued arriving. Repairs became expensive. His beautiful possessions slowly began leaving the house they once decorated. The second builder also fell ill. Yet each morning, while resting at home, something remarkable continued to happen. The flour mill still produced flour. The vineyard still harvested grapes. Merchants still rented space in his warehouse. The land quietly increased in value. Income continued flowing even while he slept. One man owned beautiful possessions. The other owned productive assets. That quiet difference changed everything. Most people spend years asking, "How can I earn more?" Builders eventually begin asking a different question. How can I own something that continues creating value long after today's work is finished? That question marks one of the great turning points in the journey toward financial freedom. Because labor creates income, ownership creates leverage. Both are valuable, but only one continues working after the workday ends. Imagine planting two gardens. The first produces flowers that bloom brilliantly for a single season. The second contains fruit trees. The flowers are breathtaking. The trees appear ordinary. Visitors admire the flowers. Few notice the young orchard. Years later, the flowers have long since disappeared. The orchard now produces harvest after harvest. Children climb its branches. Families gather beneath its shade. Its value grows with every passing season. Ownership resembles that orchard. At first, it rarely impresses anyone. Its rewards are patient. Its progress is quiet. But unlike temporary pleasures, productive assets mature instead of fading. This principle extends far beyond businesses and investments. Ownership begins as a mindset. A writer owns ideas. An inventor owns solutions. An artist owns original creations. A musician owns compositions. An engineer owns innovations. Even reputation becomes a form of ownership. Trust, once earned, continues opening doors long after the original effort has ended. Some of the world's most valuable assets cannot be touched. Knowledge, relationships, credibility, skill, character. Unlike possessions, these grow stronger the more they are used. There once lived a violin maker whose instruments were unlike any others. Every violin required nearly a year to complete. Friends questioned his patience. You could build 5 ordinary violins in the same amount of time. The craftsman simply smiled. I am not building violins. I am building a name. Decades later, musicians across the world waited years for one of his instruments. His workshop became legendary. People believed they were paying for wood. In reality, they were paying for trust. His reputation had become an asset of its own. It continued creating opportunities even when he wasn't holding a single tool. That is ownership in one of its highest forms. Many people unknowingly exchange future freedom for present comfort. Every dollar immediately consumed disappears after serving its purpose. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your labor. Life should be lived, not merely accumulated. But builders quietly ask one additional question before every significant purchase. Will this continue creating value after today? Sometimes the answer is yes. A course that expands your expertise. A book that changes how you think. A business. A carefully chosen investment. A tool that multiplies your productivity. A relationship that strengthens your character. These purchases continue giving long after the money has been spent. Other purchases simply ask to be replaced again. Recognizing the difference becomes one of life's most valuable skills. Picture a grand cathedral under construction. Visitors admire the stained glass windows, the towering arches, the polished marble floors. Yet beneath everything lies something few ever notice. Massive stone columns hidden inside the walls. Without them, the cathedral could never stand. Ownership plays the same role in a financial life. Quietly supports everything else. Income may fluctuate. Markets may change. Unexpected challenges may arise. But productive assets continue carrying part of the weight. Each one becomes another invisible column supporting your future. The old builder who owned the flour mill eventually became one of the city's most respected citizens. Not because he possessed the largest fortune, but because his wealth gave him something even more valuable. Choice. He could spend time with family without worrying about every passing day. He could help neighbors during difficult seasons. He could support young apprentices beginning their own journeys. Money had purchased something far greater than luxury. It had purchased freedom over his time. And time, once regained, became his greatest wealth of all. One afternoon, a young apprentice asked him, "What should I own first?" The old builder looked toward the skyline where cranes lifted stones into the air. Then he answered, "Before you own buildings, own your habits. Before you own businesses, own your discipline. Before you own investments, Own your decisions. The apprentice looked puzzled. I thought ownership meant possessions. The old builder smiled. Everything valuable you will ever own begins with owning yourself. Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. Because the strongest portfolios are rarely built by people who first mastered investing. They are built by people who first mastered themselves. As evening settled over the city, the builder walked through streets he had helped shape many years before. Children played beneath trees planted decades earlier. Families gathered inside buildings that once existed only as drawings on parchment. Merchants traded goods in warehouses he had quietly invested in long ago. He realized something beautiful. The greatest reward of ownership was never accumulation. It was contribution. To own something productive is to participate in creating a future larger than yourself. It is to plant trees beneath whose shade you may never fully sit. That is the quiet power of ownership. Not merely possessing more, but building things that continue serving others long after today's work is done. In the next chapter, we will stand before a mirror unlike any other mirror that reveals the single quality separating those who grow stronger through adversity from those who remain trapped by it. Responsibility. Chapter 6. The Mirror That Never Lies. There is an old story about a king who possessed a mirror unlike any ever created. It was said that the mirror had no magic. It granted no wishes. It revealed no future. Yet rulers traveled across continents hoping to look into it. Because the mirror did one extraordinary thing. It never reflected a person's face. It reflected the choices that had shaped it. The mirror stood inside a quiet stone chamber beneath the royal palace. No jewels decorated its frame. No guards announced its importance. Only a single inscription had been carved into the marble floor. Enter only if you seek the truth more than comfort. Most visitors walked away before stepping inside. Those who entered rarely stayed long. One spring morning, a young prince arrived before the mirror. He had recently lost an important battle. His advisors blamed poor weather. His generals blamed weak soldiers. His ministers blamed neighboring kingdoms. The prince repeated each explanation with growing confidence. It wasn't my fault. The conditions were impossible. No one could have succeeded. The old keeper of the chamber listened patiently. Then he unlocked the heavy wooden door. The prince stepped inside. The room was silent. He stood before the famous mirror. At first, he saw nothing. No reflection. No image. Only darkness. Then, slowly, scenes from the past began to appear. He saw himself dismissing wise advice because it challenged his opinions. He watched himself delaying difficult decisions. He remembered ignoring small problems until they became impossible to control. He saw moments when pride spoke louder than wisdom. The battle itself lasted only a few moments. Everything before it filled the entire mirror. The prince staggered backward. I came here to understand why I lost. The keeper nodded gently. You didn't lose on the battlefield. You lost in the hundreds of decisions that came before it. Years later, the prince became a respected king. People often praised his wisdom. Whenever they asked how he had changed so dramatically, he smiled. I stopped asking, who is responsible for my problems? And I began asking, what part of this belongs to me? That question may be one of the most valuable questions anyone can ever learn to ask. Not because every hardship is our fault. Life doesn't work that way. Storms arrive without permission. Markets fall. Illness appears. Jobs disappear. People disappoint us. Circumstances beyond our control shape every human life. But while we cannot always choose what happens, we always retain one extraordinary freedom. We choose what happens next. Imagine two sailors caught in the same violent storm. Neither caused the storm. Neither deserved it. Neither could stop it. Yet they respond differently. The first spends the entire night cursing the wind. He shouts at the waves. He blames the sea. He complains about fate. The second sailor also feels fear. He also wishes the storm had never arrived. But instead of arguing with reality, he adjusts the sails. He secures the ropes. He studies the current. One fights circumstances. The other works within them. By sunrise, only one ship remains on course. Responsibility is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word and immediately think of blame. But responsibility and blame are not the same thing. Blame asks, "Whose fault is this?" Responsibility asks, "What can I do now?" One looks backward. The other looks forward. One searches for excuses. The other searches for possibilities. One gives away power. The other quietly takes it back. There once lived a potter whose workshop sat beside a winding river. One spring, unusually heavy rains caused the river to overflow. Water rushed into the workshop. Months of work were destroyed overnight. Friends gathered to comfort him. "This is terrible luck. The river has ruined everything." The potter quietly nodded. "It certainly ruined my pottery." He picked up a broken clay bowl. "But it cannot ruin my hands." The next morning, while others were still discussing the flood, he began shaping fresh clay. Months later, his workshop was thriving once again. The flood had taken his work. It had not taken his ability to work. That distinction changed everything. There is a hidden cost to believing that our lives are controlled entirely by outside forces. The first feels comforting. If someone else is responsible, then someone else must also hold the solution. But over time, that belief quietly steals something precious. Initiative. Because why improve if nothing depends upon you? Why learn new skills if circumstances decide everything? Why prepare for tomorrow if today's problems belong entirely to someone else? Without realizing it, people surrender control long before opportunity ever arrives. Builders choose another path, not because life is fair, but because progress begins wherever personal responsibility begins. Consider a gardener. One year, insects destroy part of his orchard. He cannot control the insects. The following year, drought threatens the harvest. He cannot control the weather. Later, unexpected frost damages young trees. Again, beyond his control. Yet every season he continues planting, pruning, learning, improving. He accepts something profoundly simple. Nature owes him nothing. His responsibility is not controlling every outcome. His responsibility is showing up with wisdom each season. Life rewards the same attitude. Responsibility also transforms failure. Most people experience failure as a verdict. Builders experience failure as information. Imagine an inventor attempting to build a bridge unlike any before it. The first design collapses. The second develops cracks. The third survives. But barely. Someone watching from a distance might conclude the inventor has failed repeatedly. The inventor sees something entirely different. Each attempt removes another mistake. Each setback reveals another truth. Each disappointment improves the next design. Failure has become a teacher instead of an enemy. Responsibility creates that transformation. Because the responsible mind no longer asks, "Why did this happen to me?" It asks, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" One evening, the aging king returned to the chamber beneath the palace. The old keeper had long since retired. The mirror remained exactly where it had always been. The king stood before it once more. This time, the reflection looked different. He still saw mistakes. He still saw regrets. But woven among them were countless quiet moments. Apologies offered. Lessons learned. Promises kept. Difficult conversations faced instead of avoided. Courage chosen over comfort. The mirror had never demanded perfection. Only honesty. Before leaving, the king placed his hand upon the ancient frame. For the first time, he understood why so many people feared entering this room. The truth asks something difficult of us. It asks us to give up the comfort of excuses. In return, it offers something infinitely more valuable: freedom. Because the moment we accept responsibility for the parts of life we can influence, those parts begin changing. Not overnight, not effortlessly, but steadily, quietly, powerfully. And perhaps that is the greatest gift responsibility offers. It reminds us that while we may not control every chapter written for us, we always hold the pen for the chapter that comes next. In the next chapter, we will explore another invisible force that quietly shapes our future, one so powerful that it can determine our beliefs, ambitions, confidence, and even the limits we place upon ourselves without us ever noticing. The people and environments that surround us. Chapter 7. Borrowed Beliefs. There is an old tale about a young eagle that never learned it could fly. One spring morning, a violent storm swept across a mountain range, shaking nests from the cliffs. Among the fallen branches was a single eagle's egg that rolled down the mountainside into a quiet valley below. There, a farmer discovered it lying beside the nest of a family of sparrows. Feeling sorry for the tiny egg, he gently placed it among them. Weeks later, the eagle hatched. From the very beginning, it believed it was a sparrow. It hopped from branch to branch. It searched the ground for seeds, chirped as best it could. Whenever it stretched its enormous wings, the little sparrows laughed. "Don't bother. You're too big. Besides, no one in this family flies that high." The young eagle folded its wings. Perhaps they were right. Years passed. Its wings grew wider. Its body became stronger. Yet it never questioned the limits it had inherited. One autumn afternoon, an enormous eagle soared effortlessly above the valley. Its wings barely moved as it circled gracefully through the clouds. The young eagle stopped what it was doing and stared upward in awe. "What a magnificent bird," it whispered. "I wish someone like me could fly." An elderly sparrow chuckled. "Those creatures belong to another world. They're born different." The young eagle nodded quietly, then lowered its head and returned to searching for seeds. Whether the story happened exactly this way is impossible to know, but its lesson has echoed through generations. Many of the limits we accept are not discovered through experience. They are borrowed from the people around us. Long before we choose our careers, our ambitions, our financial habits, or our beliefs about success, someone else begins quietly writing the first chapters of our thinking. Parents, teachers, friends, neighbors, culture. Every conversation becomes another brushstroke on the canvas of identity. Without realizing it, we begin seeing ourselves through the expectations of those around us. Imagine planting the same oak seed in two different places. The first grows in rich, fertile soil. Sunlight reaches every branch. Nearby trees protect it from violent winds while leaving enough space to grow. The second seed lands among rocks. Its roots struggle to spread. Little sunlight reaches the ground. The soil provides almost no nourishment. Neither seed chose its environment. Neither deserved one more than the other. Yet after 20 years, their lives appear completely different. People admire the towering oak and rarely think about the invisible conditions that allowed it to flourish. Human potential often works the same way. Talent matters, effort matters, character matters, but environment quietly multiplies or limits all of them. There is a simple question that rarely receives enough attention. What do the people around you talk about most? Every group develops its own invisible language. Some conversations revolve around ideas. Others revolve around gossip. Some groups celebrate learning. Others quietly criticize anyone who dreams too boldly. Some ask, "What can we build?" Others ask, "Why bother trying?" Spend enough time in either environment, and those questions eventually become your own. Not because anyone forces you to believe them, because beliefs spread quietly through repetition. A wise gardener once said, "If you want to know what a tree will become, don't study only the seed. Study the forest." At first, those words seemed to describe nature. In reality, they describe people. Every forest creates its own climate. The trees shelter one another from harsh winds. They share nutrients through unseen roots beneath the earth. They influence how every new sapling grows. Communities do the same. The books we read, the conversations we repeat, the voices we trust, the people whose approval we seek. Together they become the emotional climate in which our future develops. Consider two young musicians. Both possess equal talent. The first spends every evening surrounded by people who encourage practice, celebrate improvement, and believe excellence is possible. Mistakes are viewed as lessons. Progress is expected. The second musician spends time with people who mock ambition. Whenever she practices, someone says, "Don't take yourself so seriously. No one makes a living doing that. You should lower your expectations." Years later, outsiders may conclude that one musician simply had more confidence. Confidence wasn't the beginning. Environment often was. Belief grows where it is repeatedly watered. This is one reason mentors matter so profoundly. A mentor does far more than share knowledge. They expand possibility. They allow us to borrow a larger vision of ourselves before we are capable of seeing it alone. Sometimes a single sentence from the right person changes the direction of an entire life. Not because it gives us new abilities, because it reminds us abilities can be developed. There is a profound difference between someone saying, "You can," and constantly hearing, "People like us never do that." One statement opens a door, the other quietly locks it. Fortunately, the modern world offers something previous generations could scarcely imagine. We are no longer limited to the people who happen to live nearby. Books become mentors. Audiobooks become companions. Great thinkers can sit beside us during a morning walk. Entrepreneurs can teach us through interviews. Historians, scientists, investors, artists, philosophers, and innovators can all become part of our invisible circle. Every page we read becomes another conversation. Every meaningful idea reshapes the architecture of our thinking. This means your environment is no longer defined only by geography. It is increasingly defined by choice. Of course, changing environments is rarely easy. Imagine climbing out of a valley where everyone insists the mountaintop doesn't exist. The higher you climb, the fewer familiar voices remain. At times, growth feels lonely. Old friendships may change. Some people misunderstand your new priorities. Others may quietly resent the discipline your life begins to reflect. Not because they dislike you, but because your progress reminds them of possibilities they have postponed. This is one of the quiet costs of transformation. Growth sometimes creates distance before it creates connection. Yet something beautiful happens when you continue climbing. Eventually, you meet others who have also chosen the upward path. The conversations become different. Ideas replace excuses. Curiosity replaces cynicism. Encouragement replaces comparison. Without realizing it, your new environment begins strengthening the very habits you once struggled to maintain alone. Many years passed in the Valley of the Sparrows. One crisp winter morning, the now-grown eagle wandered farther than ever before. Beyond the familiar fields stood a towering cliff overlooking the sea. There, an old eagle rested upon a weathered branch. The elder watched quietly as the younger bird approached. "You've come a long way," he said. "I've always wanted to see this place," the younger eagle replied. The old eagle studied him carefully. "Why do you keep your wings folded?" The younger bird looked confused. "They've never been useful." The old eagle smiled. "Then you've spent your life listening to birds who could never understand what those wings were made for." With gentle patience, he encouraged the younger eagle to step closer to the edge. Fear filled every part of him. Everything he had ever believed insisted this was impossible. But the old eagle spoke only one sentence. You don't become an eagle when you fly. You fly because you have always been an eagle. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, almost by instinct, the great wings unfolded. The wind caught them. The valley disappeared beneath him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't falling. He was soaring. Perhaps the greatest environments do not give us new identities. They simply reveal the ones that were waiting all along. The people around us matter because they shape what we believe is possible. Choose them wisely, for the voices you hear every day eventually become the voice inside your own mind. And that quiet voice will influence every decision you make long before the world ever sees its results. In the next chapter, we will discover why every extraordinary journey begins at the same place, not with certainty, talent, or perfect timing, but with the courage to take a single imperfect step beyond the safety of the harbor. Chapter 8. There is an old harbor where, according to legend, every ship dreamed of reaching the open sea. From the shore, the harbor looked perfect. The water was calm. The docks were strong. The air carried the comforting scent of salt and cedar. Every evening, travelers gathered to admire the magnificent vessels resting quietly in the bay. One ship in particular drew everyone's attention. Its polished wooden hull gleamed beneath the setting sun. The sails were immaculate. Its brass fittings shone like gold. Children pointed toward it with admiration. "What a beautiful ship," they would say. The captain would smile politely. Yet year after year, the ship never left the harbor. Storms came and went. Seasons changed. New captains arrived. Old captains retired. The beautiful ship remained exactly where it had always been. Safe, untouched, perfect. One spring morning, a weathered sailor arrived carrying only a small leather bag. He stood silently before the ship for several minutes before climbing aboard. The dock workers rushed toward him. "The sea is dangerous today. The winds are unpredictable. Perhaps you should wait another week." The sailor looked toward the horizon where sunlight danced across the endless water. "If I wait for perfect weather," he said quietly, "I'll spend my entire life preparing for a voyage I never take." Without another word, he untied the ropes. The great ship drifted away from the dock. As it reached open water, powerful waves crashed against its hull. The wind howled. The sails strained. Everything the dock workers had feared became reality. Yet something remarkable happened. The ship didn't break. Came alive. Many people spend years waiting for the perfect moment to begin. The perfect business idea. The perfect investment. The perfect opportunity. The perfect amount of confidence. The perfect economy. The perfect circumstances. But perfection has an unusual habit. Keeps moving. Every time we think we've reached it, it quietly steps one little bit farther away. The result is a life spent preparing, instead of living. Imagine an archer standing before a distant target. He spends hours adjusting his stance, checking the wind, measuring the distance, polishing the bow, straightening every arrow. Everything appears flawless. Except for one small detail. He never releases the string. Beside him stands another archer. Her technique isn't perfect. Her aim still needs improvement. Her first arrow misses. So does her second. The third lands closer. By the 10th shot, she begins understanding the wind. By the 100th, she barely recognizes the beginner she once was. The greatest teacher was never theory. It was action. There is an illusion that confidence comes before courage. As though one morning we simply wake up feeling completely ready. Life rarely unfolds that way. Confidence usually arrives afterward. It grows from evidence. Every small promise kept. Every difficult conversation faced. Every challenge survived. Every risk taken. Action quietly whispers to the mind, "See, you were capable all along." Waiting for confidence before acting is like waiting to become strong before lifting the first weight. Strength is built by lifting. Confidence is built by doing. A young apprentice once asked a master bridge builder, "How do you know your design will hold?" The old engineer smiled. "I don't." The apprentice looked startled. "You don't?" "I know it has been carefully studied. I know it follows sound principles. I know experienced builders have tested similar designs. But certainty belongs only to people who never build anything." The apprentice frowned. "So why begin?" The engineer picked up the first stone. "Because every bridge exists twice. First as an idea, then as an attempt. No bridge has ever crossed a river while remaining a drawing. Many dreams remain trapped inside notebooks, business ideas, books, art, companies, inventions, projects, not because they lacked potential, because they never left the harbor of imagination. Perfectionism often disguises itself as wisdom, tells us, wait a little longer, learn one more thing, make one more improvement. Eventually you'll be ready. Sometimes preparation is necessary, but there comes a moment when more preparation becomes another form of fear. The line between wisdom and hesitation is remarkably thin. Builders learn to recognize it. There once lived a potter famous throughout the kingdom. Visitors admired his beautiful pottery and asked how he created such flawless pieces. Instead of answering, he led them into a small room behind his workshop. One side of the room contained dozens of nearly perfect bowls. The other side overflowed with hundreds of cracked, uneven, broken attempts. The visitors looked confused. The potter smiled. "These," he said, pointing toward the broken pieces, "paid for those." Every masterpiece had invisible ancestors. Every success stood upon a mountain of imperfect beginnings. The world usually celebrates finished work. It rarely applauds the failures that made excellence possible. Imagine planting an orchard. You cannot demand fruit from a seed. You cannot rush the seasons. You cannot pull the branches upward to make the tree grow faster. Progress follows its own rhythm. So does mastery. The entrepreneur's first business may struggle. The investor's first decision may disappoint. The writer's first manuscript may need rewriting. The musician's first performance may tremble with nervousness. These moments are not signs that someone lacks ability. They are signs that someone has finally entered the process. Every expert was once a beginner willing to appear inexperienced. That willingness separates dreamers from builders. As years passed, the old sailor became known for navigating some of the most difficult waters in the kingdom. One evening, a young captain approached him. "What is the greatest lesson the sea has ever taught you?" The old sailor looked toward the horizon where another sunset melted into the ocean. "The sea has taught me that courage is rarely loud." The young captain listened carefully. "It usually sounds like this. Leave the harbor. Nothing more. Not because the voyage will be easy. Not because the storms will disappear. But because staying where you are guarantees only one destination. The one you already know." As darkness settled over the harbor, the sailor watched another young crew preparing to depart. Their hands shook as they untied the ropes. Fear was written across every face. He smiled quietly, not because they were fearless, because they had finally understood something many never do. Fear is not a sign to stop. It is often a sign that you are standing at the edge of meaningful growth. Ships are safest in the harbor, but harbors were never their purpose. The same is true of human potential. Your gifts, your ideas, your ambitions, your dreams were not given to remain permanently protected from uncertainty. They were given to serve the world beyond the shoreline. One imperfect step, one uncertain beginning, one courageous decision at a time, and perhaps one day, someone watching from the shore will call your journey extraordinary, never realizing that everything began with the simple courage to untie a rope. In the next chapter, we will explore why lasting wealth is rarely created through dramatic breakthroughs, but through one of the quietest forces in the universe, the extraordinary mathematics of patience, and the invisible power of compounding. Final chapter. The person behind the fortune. There is an old story about a traveler who spent his entire life searching for the greatest treasure in the world. He crossed deserts where the sand stretched beyond the horizon. He climbed mountains whose peaks disappeared into the clouds. He sailed across oceans guided only by the stars. Everywhere he went, people told him another story. The treasure lies beyond the next kingdom. It is hidden beneath the oldest castle. It belongs to the richest merchant. It waits inside a forgotten temple. So the traveler continued his journey. Years became decades. His hair turned silver. His footsteps slowed. Yet he never stopped searching. Finally, one autumn evening, he arrived at the home of an elderly stonemason who lived alone beside a quiet river. The old man welcomed him warmly. After supper, the traveler asked the familiar question. "I've spent my entire life looking for the greatest treasure. Can you tell me where it is?" The mason smiled and handed him a simple wooden box. The traveler opened it. It was empty. Confused, he looked up. "There is nothing inside." The old mason nodded. "Exactly." The traveler frowned. "I don't understand." The mason pointed toward the river flowing gently outside the window. "Tell me," he asked, "if someone stole your money tomorrow, could you earn it again?" The traveler thought for a moment. "Yes. If someone destroyed your business, I could build another. If someone took your house, I would build a new one." The old mason smiled. "You've just discovered the treasure." The traveler remained silent. The greatest wealth was never inside the box. It was the person capable of filling it. Many people spend their lives believing wealth exists somewhere outside themselves. In a larger paycheck, a better investment, a successful business, a lucky opportunity. Those things matter. They can improve our lives in meaningful ways. But they are not the deepest source of prosperity. Because every fortune has two parts. The visible fortune and the invisible person who created it. The visible fortune can disappear. Markets change. Businesses fail. Economies shift. Unexpected storms arrive. History has shown this countless times. Yet again and again, certain people rebuild. Not because they were lucky twice, but because they had become the kind of people who could create value wherever they stood. Throughout this journey, we have explored many ideas. We discovered that attention is the first investment every meaningful life makes. We learned that energy is the fuel behind every achievement. We saw that creators gradually build opportunities while consumers simply wait for them. We discovered that tomorrow is quietly purchased through today's preparation. We explored why ownership creates freedom that possessions alone never can. We stood before the mirror of responsibility and reclaimed the power hidden within our choices. We climbed beyond borrowed beliefs into environments that encourage growth. We untied the ropes that kept us safely trapped inside familiar harbors. And finally, we witnessed patience quietly transforming ordinary moments into extraordinary results. At first, these chapters may have seemed separate. Different lessons, different stories, different symbols, but they have always been parts of the same blueprint. A compass that teaches direction before movement. An oak tree that reminds us invisible roots determine visible strength. A journal where quiet decisions become lasting character. A harbor where courage begins with a single untied rope. A mirror that returns our power by reflecting our choices. None of these symbols represent money. They represent something far more valuable. The person capable of creating it. Imagine two people receiving the exact same fortune overnight. One has never learned discipline, never practiced patience, never developed wisdom, never built character. The other has spent years becoming a careful steward of every opportunity. 10 years later, their financial lives will almost certainly look very different. Because money does not permanently change character. it often reveals it. True wealth begins long before numbers appear in a bank account. It begins in habits, in values, in decisions made when no one is watching, in promises quietly kept, in learning when no reward is guaranteed, in choosing long-term purpose over short-term comfort. That is why genuine prosperity cannot be separated from personal growth. They are simply two expressions of the same journey. There is a quiet irony hidden within success. When we are young, we often chase wealth believing it will change who we are. But those who eventually find lasting prosperity usually discover the opposite. They changed first. The wealth simply followed. Not always quickly, not always dramatically, but steadily, almost invisibly, just as rivers carve canyons not through force, but through consistency. One evening, the old mason walked with the traveler to the edge of the river. The sun was disappearing behind distant hills, painting the water with shades of gold. The traveler looked back on his long life, the kingdoms he had visited, the treasures he had pursued, the years he believed the answer was always somewhere else. He smiled. "I think I understand now." The mason nodded. "What do you see?" The traveler looked down at his weathered hands. "I spent years searching for treasure, but the real journey was becoming someone capable of creating it." The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then your search is complete. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson wealth can teach us. Financial freedom is not merely the ability to buy more. It is the freedom to choose how we spend our time, how we serve others, how we respond to challenges, and how we leave the world a little better than we found it. Because the highest purpose of wealth is not accumulation. It is contribution. Money can build homes. Character builds communities. Money can purchase comfort. Wisdom creates peace. Money can open doors. Integrity determines what happens after we walk through them. When these qualities grow together, wealth becomes more than success. It becomes significance. And significance is the only fortune that continues growing long after our own story has ended. So, as you continue your own journey, remember this: the greatest investment you will ever make is not in a stock, or a business, or a piece of property. It is in becoming the kind of person who can create value, overcome adversity, inspire trust, and keep building regardless of the circumstances. Because fortunes may rise and fall, but a well-built character remains a source of wealth that no market can ever take away. That is the architecture of true wealth. Epilogue. The quiet builder. Long after the applause fades, after the markets close, after the goals have been achieved, one question quietly remains. Who have you become along the way? May you guard your attention as carefully as a lighthouse protects its light. May you protect your energy as faithfully as a blacksmith tends his fire. May you create more than you consume. Prepare before opportunity arrives. Own what creates lasting value. Choose responsibility over excuses. Surround yourself with people who expand your vision. Have the courage to leave safe harbors. Trust the quiet power of patience. And above all, remember that the richest lives are rarely the loudest. They are built one thoughtful decision at a time, with integrity, generosity, and purpose. Thank you for sharing this journey with Finglow Library. Until our paths cross again, keep building the invisible habits that one day become a visible legacy.